Today, this corner behind me at Commercial Row and University Way here in downtown Reno is fairly quiet. However, that wasn't always the case. Allow me to take you back to the days when this was one of the busiest corners in Reno, Nevada. Today we're going to look at a long-gone gambling club and why it's important to the history of the area and also to the history of gaming in the state of Nevada. So stay with me as we take a look at the historic Palace Club here on the Reno You Know. I think it's important to put a spotlight on old gaming establishments like this one, even if today they are just a memory. But how can they be a memory if we're not aware of them and we don't talk about them? If we don't talk about them, then they truly are forgotten. Let's not let that happen to the Palace Club. The Palace Club was one of the earliest gambling houses in Reno, and there was a business on this corner called the Palace for 91 years, all the way up to 1979. During its heyday, the Palace Club marketed itself as the oldest gambling house in Nevada, famous since 1888. Gambling was not made legal in Nevada until 1931, so back in the late 19th century, the Palace was a hotel that leased extra space for various businesses. The earliest reference that I found referring to it as the Palace Club is a short note in the Nevada State Journal newspaper in 1889. Also in the same paper in 1896, the property is referenced as the Palace Hotel, and it states that it had been so for 15 years, so it might have been known by different names. The 1896 article describes the transfer of ownership of the Palace Hotel and describes it this way. The Palace Hotel is situated within a half block of the depot. It has all of the modern conveniences of a metropolitan hotel, and its proximity to the trains make it the most desirable stopping place in Reno. The newspapers in May of 1889 describe a huge fire that almost took out the Palace Hotel. Many buildings were lost, and the newspaper describes that the block behind me here, except for one house, was completely leveled. This block later became the Overland Hotel, and then even later became part of Harrah's hotel casinos and their parking structure, which you can still see behind me. And today, as of the date of this filming, this property is known as the Revival. The walls of the Palace Hotel started to smoke from the intense heat, but the palace was saved due to the constant stream of water from the firefighters' hoses. And the newspaper went on to say that had the Palace Hotel gone up in flames, the rest of the block of Commercial Row certainly would have gone up as well. Several years later, on March 1st of 1909, yet another fire swept through, and this time it completely destroyed the old Palace Club. So construction of a brand new building started later that year. And folks, if you're enjoying this content, I encourage you to please subscribe to the channel. Doing so simply means better content for you down the road. And before you go, please click the like button on the video. That allows more people to see the video. Thank you. This area behind me before the development of Harold's Club and Harrah's was known as Commercial Row, and there were many old businesses here in cool old 19th century buildings just adjacent to the railroad tracks. It would have been really cool if our city had the foresight to have preserved these old buildings and we could be enjoying them today, but this whole area was razed in the 1970s for an expansion of Harold's Club. To be fair though, at the time these buildings were pretty run down and dilapidated and had many code violations. Structurally, it could have been possible to save them. Just look at what they did with Old Sacramento. However, in the competitive gaming environment of Nevada, not much stands in the way of progress. As a side note, one of the businesses that moved out of Commercial Row so its building could be demolished in 1977 was Palace Jewelry and Loan. Were the Palace names related? I stopped in here a couple days ago and no one was quite sure. And also looking through the old newspapers, I found ads for a Palace Dry Goods. So, I don't know, maybe Palace was a popular name to name a business back in the day. Palace Jewelry and Loan started in 1958, and in the 1970s it moved to this corner of Virginia and Plaza Streets, and it continues on to this day. If you recall my video on the Jeffries-Johnson heavyweight title fight held here in Reno in 1910, the attention of the entire country was focused here, whether or not the great white hope Jim Jeffries would dispatch the black champion Jack Johnson as was expected. The newly rebuilt Palace Hotel was actually the headquarters for the fight, as we can see in these photos from back in the day. This was an era when Center Street, now called University Way in this area, was the vibrant heart of a then small town. Only later would gambling migrate over to Virginia Street and make that the center of the action. The Palace property was sold in 1924 to a gentleman named John Petricciani. John Petricciani was born in Keno, Italy in 1887 and first came to Reno in 1904 as a 17-year-old. And then he went back to Italy for a spell and got married, and then returned to the US to Redding, California, and then again showed up in Reno in 1915, and here he would live the rest of his life. And John Petricciani purchased this house behind me at 675 South Virginia Street in 1920, and here he would live out the rest of his days. He passed away in 1955. And then his widow Julia continued living here until her death in 1987. Today this property is zoned mixed use and is part of Reno's vibrant Midtown district. John Petricciani's son later recounted a story that while John was in Sacramento as a young man, he liked to come to Reno to play a game called Faro Bank. He had saved $400 and brought $200 with him, and he soon lost that $200 at the Palace. He had left his other $200 with his cousin in Sacramento, and he wired for that and proceeded to lose that as well. Now without any money, he went to the proprietor and asked if he might be helped with some money to help him get back to Sacramento, and he was told to just leave the premises. As he walked out the door, he turned around and he shook his fist at the building and he said, "One of these days, I'm going to own you." And sure enough, he kept his promise. He did eventually buy the Palace Club building. After purchasing the corner property, he didn't operate a business there himself. For many years, he leased out the space to various businesses, including a department store, a barber shop, and a soft drink parlor. In 1931, shortly after gambling was made legal in Nevada, he ran a craps game for a short time at the Palace, then known as the Palace Cigar Store. Also from 1931 to 1933, he leased the upper floors to Reno's quasi-gangsters William Graham and James McKay, who used that location for their Bank Palace Club. I'll leave a link to the video that I did on these two colorful characters at the end of this video, and also at the end I'm going to put up several then and now photos of the scenes that we're talking about here. Gambling in Reno certainly was in existence before it was legalized in 1931, and games like 21 and craps and roulette and slot machines were actually prevalent in Reno, and they were condoned by the authorities for the most part. John Petricciani was one of the early founders of the gaming industry here in Nevada, and he was one of a group of guys that went to the state legislature in 1931 and campaigned for the legalization of gambling in the state of Nevada. Harold Smith Sr. of Harold's Club wouldn't show up until 1935, and then Bill Harrah followed him in 1937. At the time, Reno was known as the divorce capital of the world, and people were coming to town with money and gambling anyway. So to help generate much-needed taxes for the state, Governor Fred Balzar signed off on legalization in 1931. After leasing to Graham and McKay, John Petricciani maintained a slot machine route in Reno, in which he owned the machines and split the profits 50-50 with the establishment. And for many years, he was known as Slot Machine Johnny. In 1934, John Petricciani got back into the gambling business at the Palace after his slot machine route customers came to the realization that they could own and operate their own machines.
In 1935, he changed the name on the license to the Palace Club, and the building would retain this name until the end. John did very well for himself and was well known around town.
One of the big reasons that the Palace Club is significant is that this was the original home of the game of Keno in the state of Nevada. And for decades to follow, Keno would be a big revenue contributor for the casinos and also a big tax contributor to the state of Nevada. A fella from Montana that worked at the Palace Club suggested to John Petricciani that he might want to try this game, which was then known as Racehorse Keno because it was successful up in Montana. And John thought it was a good idea, but there was a hitch.
It was believed that the game might be considered a lottery, which was a problem because Nevada had a law prohibiting lotteries. So John Petricciani went down to Carson City and had a chat with the governor, and it was decided that Keno would not be classified as a lottery, so they were good to go. When it was first offered at the Palace Club, there were no experienced Keno riders in town, so several people were brought down from Montana to run the game, which was soon offered at competing properties due to its popularity. By 1937, the Palace Club had expanded to 7,000 square feet of gaming space, offering one crap game, 6 21 games, 1 roulette, 2 games of faro, and 150 slot machines to complement its successful Keno game.
In 1934, John's son Silvio, or Sil as he was known, graduated high school and came to work with his father at the Palace Club, and he learned all the facets of the gaming business. And later in life, Sil Petricciani became a fixture in the Reno gaming scene. During World War II, though, Sil was drafted into the U.S. Army and was unavailable to help his father with the business. And this, coupled with John's ill health at the time, led to the decision to lease out the gaming operations at the Palace for 20 years.
When Sil came back home from the war, he moved to Las Vegas, and he served as the gaming manager at the El Rancho, the Fremont Hotel, and the Stardust. In the ensuing 20 years, many people were involved with the leased gaming at the Palace, including Ernie Prim, who would later own and operate the Prima Donna Casino on Virginia Street. When the lease expired in 1964, the family members that still owned the property decided that they would get back into the gaming business in Reno. The sons and daughters of John Petricciani were licensed for 25% each, Sil and John, the brothers, and Clorinda and Marietta, the daughters. They were licensed on the condition that they put up a $370,000 bankroll, which they did.
Sil went right to work in fixing up the old place because over the years it had become pretty run down and dirty. They ended up gutting the interior and doing a complete remodel, including installing a new restaurant that offered good food at reasonable prices. And Sil also installed a glorious neon facade on the outside of the building, and they started to market the property as Reno's brightest corner. It was business as usual throughout the 1970s until September 28, 1979, when Sil Petricciani went to his 281 employees and announced that the Palace Club had been sold to Harrah's. And Harrah's had been wanting to purchase this property for several months. At the time, Sil's brother-in-law and co-owner came to him and said that he couldn't work anymore due to his back surgery, and Sil just didn't want to run the place by himself at the age of 62. The purchase price was not disclosed, although it was rumored to be in the 6 figures, and Harrah's would not comment on when it would reopen the club.
By the fall of 1982, Harrah's had not done much with the building, and it was in such a dilapidated condition that the city ordered it removed as it had become a safety hazard. So the almost century-old Palace Club, at the time the state's oldest casino, Reno's brightest corner, was torn down, and the area became a parking lot. Later, after the closure, Sil Petricciani took a job as the general manager of the Mapes Hotel and the Money Tree Casino, and unfortunately, 3 years after he announced the Palace closure to those employees, he again had to announce the closure of the Mapes and the Money Tree, this time to approximately 600 people that were being put out of work a week before Christmas with no final check. While doing research for this video, I found that the University of Nevada Special Collections Department had 9 boxes full of paperwork from the Palace Club. So I made an appointment to go down there and see, and I went through all 9 boxes. The collections consist of mainly business papers and a lot of numbers. Old paid invoices from the 1930s and 40s, daily accounting of the performance of the table games, business and personal correspondence of the Petriccianis, and did I mention lots of accounting? The university obtained this collection from Holabird Americana, a local auction house.
All right, thanks for hanging out to the end of this video. I sure appreciate your time, and I hope you'll learn something interesting and fascinating like I do with almost every video here. I was going to finish up this video at the boneyard where John and Sil Petricciani are laid to rest, but they're in the mausoleum up at the Our Mother of Sorrows boneyard up in North Reno, and I went up there and the doors were locked tight. So we'll just have to speak about them here. At the Brewer's Cabinet. The Brewer's Cabinet has been here near downtown Reno since 2012, and they make a lot of yummy craft beers here on site. And today I'm enjoying a Dirty Wookie, and the Dirty Wookie's been around for a number of years. I've had it a couple times. And it's an Imperial Brown Ale, 7.2% ABV. So come on down to the Brewer's Cabinet and enjoy some wonderful craft beer. Sil Petricciani himself passed away at the age of 93 in 2011, which is 14 years ago from the date of this filming. And I really wish I was able to speak to him, but he did leave an extensive oral history for the University of Nevada Oral History Program. In 1977 and 1978, he completed his oral history with an interviewer over 14 separate recording sessions that he did in his office at the Palace Club. I tried to dig up the actual physical recordings, but we couldn't find those, but we do have the transcript, and I used that as the basis for the outline of this video so I could get my facts straight. So that is all I have for you today. I sure appreciate your time. Please check out my Facebook page, the Reno You Know on Facebook, so you can see behind the scenes and other extra goodies. And I'm also starting to post fairly regularly on Instagram, so you can check that out as well, the Reno You Know on Instagram. So, as Harold S. Smith Sr. of Harold's Club always said, I'm with you. Cheers.